In the heavy silence of a South African night, beneath the unmoving gaze of Nelson Mandela's tomb, a man steps forward. The wind stirs the ancient stones, carrying a secret that threatens to shake an entire continent. Around him, heads of state hesitate, caught between fear and compromise, while the eyes of the African people search the horizon, longing for a spark. Tonight, nothing will ever be the same again. But what price will he have to pay to reignite this flame? The wind in Cape Town blew cold that morning, cutting short whispered conversations in the well-kept pathways of the Koudougou Memorial. The black armored vehicles lined up on the right side of the field testified to the presence of several African heads of state. The anniversary of Nelson Mandela's death brought together, as it did each year, the continent's powerful. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Heavy. Quiet. Ibrahim Traoré stood gazing at the distant hills from the promontory where the presidential procession was to gather before the ceremony. He wore his plain military uniform, no embellishments, refusing to adopt the tailored French suits some leaders had hurried to put on. Beside him, his diplomatic advisor, Yakuba Kare, spoke in a low, almost nervous voice. "Ibrahim, they've put you last on the list. I think they want you to close things out on a soft note. You know, a word on peace, on African dialogue, those kinds of formulas." "I didn't come to recite hymns, Yakuba," Ibrahim replied without looking at him. "Mandela didn't spend 27 years in prison for us to come and play theater at his grave." Yakuba fell silent. He knew that debating strategy with the captain was never simple, especially when he felt his moral boundaries were about to be crossed. For weeks, diplomatic pressure had been mounting on Burkina Faso. Washington and Paris had intensified their campaigns against the so-called military radicalization in the Sahel. Leaked reports accused Ouagadougou of violating economic agreements, of endangering regional stability. Meanwhile, in the streets of Bobo Dioulasso and Kaya, the youth cried out in hunger. Electricity was scarce. Development funds were frozen. Sovereignty projects suffocated. But the crisis was more than economic. Africa was in a full-blown crisis of legacy. Everyone seemed to have forgotten what Mandela, Sankara, Lumumba, even Gaddafi, had tried to build: a free voice, collective dignity, real independence. The new generations heard only the language of debt, conditional aid, and pointless summits. Ibrahim watched the other leaders move toward the mausoleum. The Kenyan president flashed a mechanical smile at the cameras, the Nigerian was glued to his phone, and the Ivorian head of state whispered to a European diplomat. No one spoke of unity. No one spoke of liberation. "What exactly are you going to say?" Yakuba asked, clearly worried. "The truth. Even if no one wants to hear it." There lay the dilemma. Stick to the expected script, stay within the diplomatic lines drawn by the game's true masters, or break the silence, even at the cost of isolation. If he spoke too boldly, Ibrahim risked losing allies. But if he stayed quiet, he would betray his own youth, those who had grown up in a Burkina that had been looted, manipulated, and abandoned. He took a slow breath. Mandela's name echoed in him like a summons. Not a statue. A living memory. A man who had dared. Who had suffered for his people, not for his career. Ibrahim didn't want to be among those who laid a wreath only to return and sign away their people's future. He clenched his fists. The moment was approaching. His name was being called. "Captain Traoré, you're on in 10 minutes. He nodded. His mind was made up. He wouldn't speak to the presidents. He would speak to Africa. Silence had settled like a thick fog when Ibrahim stepped up to the podium facing Nelson Mandela's grave. Behind him, a row of African flags fluttered weakly in the cold air as international cameras zoomed in. In front of him sat a motionless crowd, heads of state, diplomats, foundation representatives, South African military. Everyone waited, most assuming that the young Burkinabè president would stick to the expected diplomatic pleasantries. He removed his beret and placed it gently on the edge of the podium. His eyes scanned the audience briefly, then locked onto the granite tombstone engraved with the words, "It is in your hands now." He pulled out no paper. No prepared speech. The silence grew heavier. "I haven't come here to speak for the cameras. I've come to speak to Africa." A murmur rippled through the rows. A Senegalese minister exchanged a worried glance with his Angolan counterpart. Ibrahim continued, his voice calm and steady. "Every year we come here to lay flowers on the grave of a man who fought for freedom. And then what? We get back on planes, return to signing dependency agreements, bowing to the very forces Mandela stood up against." He paused for a moment. Then his voice rose with conviction. "Where is the fire of independence? Smothered by debt, by foreign military bases, by our own fears. We have betrayed Mandela, just as we betrayed Sankara." Faces stiffened. Arms folded. Some leaders began slipping out discreetly. Media technicians hesitated. Should they keep filming? Ibrahim's voice did not waver. "I have not come to beg. I've come to call. To call upon African youth, the ones sleeping outside while their elites ride in motorcades. The ones sent to die at the front lines to protect borders we don't even control. The ones who will no longer wait for permission to be free." He paused again. In the tense silence, the scraping of a chair across the floor rang louder than thunder. The president of Côte d'Ivoire stood, offered a cold nod to the South African host, and walked out. Others followed. But Ibrahim continued without flinching. "Today, I speak for those without a microphone. The silenced ones. The workers, the farmers, the students, the single mothers. Africa does not lack heroes. It lacks people willing to pay the price of inheritance." At that moment, the central broadcast cut audio on several international channels. The image continued, mute. But African journalists, phones in hand, kept filming. Clips were already being uploaded live on social media. When Ibrahim finished, he simply gave a brief military salute toward the tomb. No bowing. No pretense. Outside, a South African official intercepted him. "Mr. President, you've made people uncomfortable. This wasn't the place for political provocation." It wasn't a political speech. It was a call to conscience. If Mandela's grave isn't the right place to speak the truth, then we have no sacred ground left. Within an hour, the first headlines dropped. A European outlet called him the rogue captain causing diplomatic chaos. Another framed it as an unstable young leader going off script. But in South Africa, in Soweto, a group of students posted a subtitled clip in Zulu with the caption, "Finally, someone who dares." And in the streets of Ouagadougou, just 3 hours later, young people began putting up posters with one line in bold red. "We are not orphans. We are the heirs." The wind was rising. 3 days after the speech, the fire was spreading everywhere. In Johannesburg, students symbolically occupied the entrance of the Apartheid Museum. In Dakar, a spontaneous rally displayed placards quoting Ibrahim's words. In Kinshasa, a young rapper turned the speech into a freestyle that went viral on TikTok. In Ouagadougou, graffiti artists unofficially renamed Place de la Nation as Air Square. But while the streets were vibrating, the corridors of power were closing in. At the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, a closed-door meeting was called. Several leaders, annoyed by Ibrahim's uncontrolled outburst, proposed a joint statement condemning the politicization of historical commemorations for personal purposes. The tone was diplomatic, but the message was clear. Traoré was now viewed as a loose cannon threatening the fragile balance between obedient states and those awakening. In Burkina Faso, the president was informed by his special advisor, Aruna Zongo, a respected but cautious former diplomat. "They're trying to isolate you, Ibrahim. Some are even talking about revisiting cooperation agreements. They call you a populist. Unstable. They can say what they want. The people understand. The people understand today. But tomorrow, they'll be hungry. And sanctions can starve fast." The phrase hung in the air. Ibrahim let the silence stretch. He trusted Aruna's loyalty, but he also sensed the fear behind his pragmatism. Tension escalated when, 2 days later, a convoy of food aid was blocked at the Malian border. The unofficial reason, Burkina's diplomatic instability. In truth, It was a clear maneuver to test Ibrahim's resolve. During a crisis meeting, the military advisors argued, "We can't retaliate without escalating. If we stay silent, we show we can be strangled at will." Strike where? At whom? We can't afford a misstep. Ibrahim listened. Then he spoke, calmly. "We will respond. But not to them. To the people." That same evening, a national address aired on RTB. No flags. No embellishments. Ibrahim spoke directly to the Burkinabè people, without a teleprompter. "Some want me to apologize for speaking the truth. For saying, at the graves of our elders, that our generation can no longer kneel. I will not apologize. Because what we defend here is not a posture. It's our survival." He explained the consequences: pressure, threats, blockades. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. But he called for unity. Those trying to silence us are betting on our division. But they forget, when a people rises, not with hatred, but with clarity, even the thickest walls start to tremble. The next day, the effect was immediate. In Koudougou, merchants started a supply drive for border regions. In Bobo Dioulasso, students organized a public forum on sovereignty. The people weren't retreating. They were arming themselves with knowledge. But in the shadows, a different danger was rising. Colonel Koudougou, a senior army officer and former academy mate of Ibrahim, now head of presidential security, was contacted by a foreign mission based in Accra. The message was crystal clear: your president has become a regional destabilizing force. Burkina needs a more predictable leader. Koudougou had never betrayed anyone. But he knew power games. He also knew whispered promises were often more dangerous than public threats. That night, he sat alone in his office, lights off, rereading a line from Ibrahim's speech. Africa doesn't lack heroes. It lacks men willing to pay the price of inheritance. He knew a choice was coming. And whatever he chose, there would be a cost. The next day, the sky over Ouagadougou seemed lower than usual. A heavy heat smothered the streets, and in the barracks, glances were tense, movements slower. Something hung in the air, a silent pressure, almost invisible, but felt in everyone's bones. At the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré convened a close circle. No generals, no diplomats. Just 4 people he trusted: Aruna Zongo, his advisor; Mariam Cabaret, an economist and civil society activist; Captain Diallo, head of internal intelligence; and Commander Sanu, loyal from the earliest days. "I'm not asking you to follow me blindly," Ibrahim said, looking each of them in the eyes. "I'm asking you to help me protect what's still standing." He shared what his agents had uncovered: conversations between certain Burkinabè officers and foreign diplomats, notably from an embassy in Accra. He didn't mention Koudougou by name. Not yet. But everyone understood. They want a reasonable transition. Their favorite word. Mariam crossed her arms and replied, "The streets are with you, Ibrahim. But if you leave them alone to face repression or hunger, they'll turn against you." So they built a plan. Not a show of force, a show of truth. That very evening, in a lecture hall at the University of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim appeared without security. Not as a head of state, as a man. He spoke to hundreds of students, young professors, and civil servants. He spoke about what no one dared to: the humiliating military agreements signed 20 years ago, the mining concessions sold off for nothing, the foreign bases that dictated the country's security. A nervous student raised his hand. "And if you fall, what are we supposed to do?" Ibrahim didn't flinch. "Then you rise. And you carry on." Meanwhile, at the Paspanga barracks, Koudougou received a call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly. "It's time. If you wait, you'll fall with him. You deserve better." But Koudougou hadn't given an answer. He hesitated. He remembered their academy days. Ibrahim refusing a bribe during a command exercise, even under pressure. His refusal to compromise, frustrating at times, but always consistent. That night, a discreet convoy left from the northern border. Food supplies, previously diverted by networks linked to foreign companies, had been intercepted by Diallo's services. The covert operation aimed to redistribute the goods to areas hardest hit by the blockade. Ibrahim knew the people needed symbols, but also action. He ordered the immediate release of the operations details, with photos, on official networks. The message was clear: we will not bend, and we will feed our people. The shockwave hit the next day. In Accra, Paris, Washington, reports piled up. The Traoré effect is consolidating. Counter-narratives are failing. Media manipulation was losing ground to viral videos, street chants, children shouting, "We will not sell our future." But the decisive moment came 3 days later. A coded message reached the palace. A coup was being prepared. Midnight. Take over the radio. Targeted arrests. All disguised as an institutional realignment. Ibrahim made a radical decision. Instead of hiding or resisting from the shadows, he called a press conference, in broad daylight, in front of cameras from around the world. He stared directly into the lens. If they want to remove me, let them do it in front of the people. I will not hide. I am here, and I will not back down. He finished with a cold line. Africa has no shortage of executioners. It lacks witnesses. A few hours later, Koudougou arrived at the palace. Alone. He asked to see Ibrahim. In the silence of the office, he looked up. They offered me your seat. And you refused? No. I hesitated. Until I saw you on TV. And then I remembered. Remembered what? That even a soldier can choose to be a man. He pulled a USB stick from his pocket. Recordings of the secret meetings with foreign diplomats. Proof. Ibrahim took it without a word. He simply placed a hand on his old comrade's shoulder. Then we go on. The return to Burkina Faso was not that of a triumphant hero, but of a man burdened with heavy responsibilities, aware of the fractures to heal and the immense challenges still ahead. At Ouagadougou airport, the crowd gathered was neither massive nor organized, but vibrant with new energy. The eyes of children, the raised fists of young women, faces marked by long days of struggle, all testified that the breath of his speech had crossed borders. A few days later, in a modest school in the popular Bulmiogo district, Ibrahim visited a classroom where young African activists had gathered. He entered without ceremony, his boots stopping in front of a half-erased blackboard. The students watched him attentively, curiosity mixed with hope. Without a word, he took the chalk and slowly wrote in capital letters a phrase from his speech. Africa does not lack heroes. It lacks men willing to pay the price of the legacy. A respectful silence settled, heavy with meaning. Then a young woman timidly raised her hand. Captain, how do we pay that price without losing our soul? Ibrahim looked at her for a long moment and replied gravely. By refusing the easy way, by staying true to your convictions even when it's hard. By putting the people before yourself. By knowing the path is long, but every step counts. He then spoke to them about Mandela, not as a statue frozen in history, but as a flame to be passed on, fragile, yet capable of lighting up the darkness. He spoke of the traps of power, the temptation of compromise, the dangers of fear and silence. Those who rest beneath African soil do not sleep as long as those who live on it still accept to be chained, he concluded. The young people listened, some with tears in their eyes, others clenched with anger or hope. The room resonated with their questions, their dreams, and their fierce will to change the course of things. In the days that followed, echoes of this speech spread. Spontaneous gatherings appeared in Ouagadougou, Dakar, Kinshasa, Johannesburg. Songs, marches, debates in universities and popular neighborhoods. A call to no longer wait, to no longer endure. For Ibrahim, this was only the beginning. The struggle would be long, difficult, full of obstacles. But the line was drawn. Sovereignty, justice, and African dignity are not empty words. They are daily commitments, personal sacrifices, and a collective fight. The moral of his commitment now resonated stronger than ever. Africa does not lack heroes. It lacks men willing to pay the price of the legacy. Those who rest beneath African soil do not sleep as long as those who live on it still accept to be chained. Ibrahim Traoré, captain and head of state, knew that true power does not lie in palaces, but in the unwavering will of his people.